This broadcast of In Focus is being made possible through the support of Reed Health. Reed Health, right beside you. And by First Bank Richmond, with 8 locations serving Wayne County. First Bank Richmond and you, doing great things together. Hi, welcome to this week's In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. When things were normal, kind of BV, this would be a week where the vote centers would be open. You would be out and you would be hopefully voting for those people that are in primary races for commissioner, clerk, 6th congressional district, coroner. Instead, you actually still have a few days up until May 4th to register to vote. So to find out more about how you can get voting done, whether you want to go out and vote on June 2nd or whether you want to do it from the comfort and safety of your home, we had a chance to speak with Wayne County Clerk Debbie Berry. Here's how that conversation went. And on this week's In Focus program, thanks for joining us. We have a chance to speak with Wayne County Clerk Debbie Berry. Debbie, how are you today?
I'm good, Eric. Thank you.
I will say in normal time, as it were, we would actually be winding down this election season. We would be heading to the vote centers being open next week and voting in person the day of, the week after that. But we're still at this moment actually looking at people still being able to vote. Talk about how your office has gone through with some of the changes and even the updates that you all have had to really watch out for during this time frame.
Well, of course, since the governor and the election commission postponed our election to June the 2nd, we have been working with state and federal entities in order to be updated on different information about the COVID-19 virus and how we can protect voters and our staff and to still be able to run a fair and balanced election. So as they have made these decisions, they have, of course, sent all the information to us with the updates. And as that postponed election came into effect, also, there are some deadlines that came into effect also that we have been able to move out and be able to get those to the voters so that they can be aware.
I want to go through all of that with you while I've got you, particularly talking about how when we get to in-person voting, you're going to be working on keeping the poll workers and your staff safe and separated. But let's start with the dates that people have coming up. First of all, as late as it is and as odd as it seems, people still have a chance to register to vote in the 2020 primary election. That date is coming up on May 4th, but it has not yet passed, correct?
Correct.
Easiest way for them to do it, online, indianavoters.com. Is that what you're suggesting for most people? Because your office at this moment is closed to the public. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is the best way is through the website at indianavoters.com. And people can register to vote there, but also voters can access their information to see that it is correct. Also, they can see who's on the ballot, and of course, they can see our vote center locations.
Okay. For voting,
absentee voting, and any early voting, even if it's in public, is absentee. I think I've learned that from you. Talk about the ways that people can actually vote and when they can start voting.
Okay. Well, absentee voting is any form of voting that is before Election Day. So that can be in person or that can be mail-in absentee voting. So, of course, anyone who feels safe to go to the vote center to vote can certainly do that. Because of the COVID-19 virus, we are encouraging anyone in that high-risk group, elderly and or people with the immune deficiency in their system, to vote absentee by mail. In order to vote absentee by mail, they can go to our website, download and print off an application, get that in the mail to us, and we have to receive those applications by May the 21st. So once we receive that application, because it's a primary, on that application it asks which ballot they want, either the Democratic or the Republican ballot. We'll send them that ballot. Once we receive their application, they can mark the ballot, put it in the secured envelope that will be in the ballot that we send them, and mail it back. That will be counted on Election Day. The Wayne County Election Board opens all mail-in ballots, canvasses those ballots, and we scan them, and they are counted just as a ballot cast in person. If they're safe, feel safe to vote, we, at this time, as far as we know, we will be having the availability of them to cast a ballot in person, early voting at the vote centers, or here at the courthouse. This year we will have only one Saturday open, and that's the Saturday immediately before the election. That Saturday's date will be May the 30th. Kuhlman will be open, and here at the courthouse, voters can come and vote. We will not be voting on the 25th at our vote centers or the courthouse, because that is Memorial Day, and certainly we respect our veterans who gave their all, so we will honor that holiday. So early voting in person will start on Tuesday, May the 26th at 4 vote centers and continue through the 29th. Then on the 30th, again, in-person voting here at the courthouse and at Kuhlman only. Then on Monday, June the 1st, if they have not voted in person, did not get their mail-in ballot in, there is a small window of opportunity until noon, 8:30 a.m. until noon, to vote here at the courthouse. And then all in-person voting ends. And Election Day, June the 2nd, we will open the 8 vote centers and have our election at that time. Now, we will be practicing social distancing. As we all know, there are guidelines from the CDC that we have to follow for that. So as long as that is in place, we will follow those guidelines. And if that is lifted, then we'll just have our regular election. But there is, instructions from the CDC for mass gatherings. The number of voters that will be allowed in, right now, we are still in the planning stages of that because we're under that restriction.
The number of voters that will be allowed inside any particular vote center at one time is what you're talking about.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. As long as that restriction is still in place. And like I said, I don't think any of us know right now from day to day, where that is going to go in the next 30 days.
Okay. Absentee in-person voting at the vote centers. Tuesday, May 26th through Friday, May 29th. Those locations are the Coleman Center, First English Lutheran Church, Hagerstown New Testament Church, and the Golay Center. The voting on election day opens up a couple of different locations. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, we open up. So far, Eric, we have contacted all of our vote center locations, and they are still available for election day. So those vote centers will be opened to include the additional 4, which is First Baptist in Richmond, Mount Olive Baptist, Centerville Christian, and Life River used to be Fountain City Wesleyan on 227 North. Those 4 will additionally be added, just as we've always been so fortunate to have those vote centers.
Okay. Debbie, explain for us what the difference between absentee mail-in voting and mail-in and regular, and what people out west consider mail-in voting. Is there a difference, and why does there seem to be such hesitation to allow just more regular mail-in voting? If this is something that people have been able to do in an absentee basis for a while, when we talk about making it more accessible, there seems to be some pushback. As a clerk, can you talk about why you feel that that exists, and should those fears be there?
Well, we haven't experienced a problem with mail-in ballots. You know, here in Wayne County, those applications, when they're sent out, when they come back, we confirm their signature with their voter's registration card to make sure that, in fact, it does appear to be the same signature. Our board looks at those. Our absentee board looks at those to validate that they appear to be the same, at least with our e-poll books even, and with the registration cards. We keep the hard copy on file here that we can always pull and look at. They're also electronic with the state voters registration system. So we do look at those, and many times, you know, we take into consideration if we have a voter's registration card when they registered to vote in 1970, and now this is 1920, this is 2020, you know, 30 years later or more, then their handwriting is going to change, and we take into consideration their birth date, where they're sending their absentee application from, if it is an assisted living center. I mean, age does do things, you know, to our handwriting, so we're very conscious of that. We don't want to disenfranchise anyone from casting their vote. That particular, as far as mail-in and absentee in person, I can only speak for Indiana, Eric. I'm not really that familiar with the laws out west, or however, it is something that is legislative set. It's not something that we can independently as the clerk decide to do. So it is, you know, something that we have to follow what the legislatures have enacted. In Indiana, since we are a vote center county, we do have no excuse voting for the mail-in ballot now. So, and, you know, for our early voting, there's a huge change as far as always previously in elections, 29 days before the election, voters can come into the courthouse and vote, and that is not the case for this primary election. That has been eliminated. But the mail-in, we check those, you know, very closely we keep track of those. We check the signatures. So if that is where there's a hiccup in other states out west that they don't have that they check, I don't know. Like I said, I can't speak to that. I don't
And
know
I'm not
what the
saying that they
problem.
do. It's just when I have conversations with people about extending mail-in voting and just in general conversations about, listen, even outside of a pandemic situation, there are people in other places in the country that vote by mail. They don't go to vote centers. They don't vote in person. They just regularly vote by mail. The pushback that I get a lot is, well, there's a lot of fraud with that. And I'm just trying to figure out as a clerk, if our elections were run by purely mail-in ballot, do you see an issue that couldn't be overcome in a clerk's office with countering fraud? Are there ways around that? I mean, you've been a clerk for a while, so I'm just curious as to your thoughts about, because you see ballots come in and you say you're making those decisions and you're figuring out how that works. If the numbers were greater, if all of us were doing that, is that a bigger burden?
Well, certainly, the structure of my office. We have one full-time voters registration employee, and then myself that's full-time. And we have 2 part-time people who work there just 29 hours a week. So we have 41,000 registered voters in Wayne County. So if 41,000 voters, if we sent everyone a mail-in ballot and those came in, it might be problematic. We would we would have to, step up the number of people that we have working in that office for that time, depending on what the legislatures would allow us to do. Maybe, I've thought about this a lot because in thinking that possibly even this election may go all mail-in, before they made the decision to, eliminate the 29 days before the election for in-person voting and just go to the Tuesday through Friday and then the one Saturday. There was rumblings and rumors that we would be an all mail-in election. So, we were trying to plan, okay, how are we going to handle all of those mail-in ballots, coming in to our office? So there, has been some changes made even because we are encouraging more mail-in ballots. We have 10 days after the election to get, all of those counted. So our voters are going to have to understand that if we have a huge influx of mail-in ballots, we cannot possibly, 3 election board members, open all of those on election day. If we start at 5 a.m. and go till midnight, there will still, we have to open them, scan them. So we will have until 10 days after the election, we'll have until June the 12th to get those counted and get, the number of votes counted and to the public and get those up. So we are expecting, we have extended that counting time, of course. So, we are expecting more mail-in ballots because we're encouraging people to, for their safety's sake, to avoid exposure to the virus, to use that application for a mail-in ballot. So we would have to make changes here, Eric, but
sure.
I don't feel any fear of fraud or anything. Because if something comes in and it doesn't match, it's immediately set aside, and then we make arrangements to have hearings or whatever, and those hearings have to be held before, it's just a different path that we have to take, a little bit more work here in our office, but, whatever we have to do to have an election, we just have to, find ways to be able to thoroughly and efficiently work through those issues.
Okay. You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're spending some time with Wayne County Clerk Debbie Berry as the pandemic has kind of changed our normal existence. It has extended the time that people have to register to vote. You have until Monday, May 4th to register to vote. If you are planning on voting absentee by mail, you need to fill out an application. That application is available on the Wayne County Clerk's site. And Debbie, please correct me if I state anything wrong here. That application needs to be returned to you by May 21st. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so if you're planning on doing that, if you're not planning on going out to one of the vote centers to vote and you need to do a mail-in, go to the clerk site. That information, that URL will appear at the bottom of the screen. You can get there easily if you go to co.wayne.in.us. I believe I got all of that right.
Yes.
And under offices, you can find the clerk's office, and you can find that ballot there for those who are just listening to the audio of this program. That's available for you. In-person voting will begin on Tuesday, May 26th, go through May 29th, Coleman Center, Golay Center, First English Lutheran Church, Hagerstown New Testament Church. Those are 10 to 7 on each of those days. One Saturday of voting, normally there are 2. That's going to be on Saturday, May 30th, 9 to 4, basically at the courthouse, 10 to 3 at the Coleman Center, and then primary election day is Tuesday, June 2nd, Coleman Center, First English Lutheran Church, Golay Center, Hagerstown New Testament Church, Mount Olive Baptist Church, Life Spring North Church, Centerville Christian Church Family Center, and First Baptist Church are those locations. Talk a little bit about, Debbie, if you would, one, poll workers. A number of your poll workers generally are those who are in categories who are really trying to socially distance themselves. Has that created for you a problem as you look at the in-person voting and being able to put people in these vote centers, the 26th through the 29th, and then the 8 voting places on election day? Is that an issue? Are you still looking for people? And when is that training going to take place, if it hasn't already?
Okay, good question, because right now, so far, we have not had a problem with, our election workers who have been signed up to continue to vote. I will say we are very appreciative. Primex Plastics has donated 100 of the face shields for our poll workers, so we will have that. Another individual, Jane Bumbelow, has donated hand-sewn masks that, for all of our poll workers. And, those volunteers who do that kind of work, it's very much appreciated at this time. We are preparing to protect our poll workers with gloves, masks, face shields, hand sanitizer. We will be wiping down the tables, wiping down the equipment that the voters use with sanitized wipes that are safe for our equipment. There will be no public restrooms available at the vote centers for voters, obviously, because of the COVID and people touching the doorknobs and the sink handles and all of those things. We are just preserving those restrooms for our poll workers to be able to wash their hands with soap and just less exposure, to them to spread it or cross-contamination.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we haven't had any notices, Eric, stating that they've decided not to work. I hope that if they do not feel safe, that they will let us know early enough to be able to get, other people. We have put the word out, with everyone that if you are interested in being a poll worker, to contact us or the party chair of each of the major political parties. We do have a few who have called and said they would like to work, and of course, we have scheduled them. Our training for our poll workers is May the 18th, 19th, and 20th. Those letters are going out. If they have not been mailed or have not received them, they can certainly contact our office. Another thing that I just wanted to say when you were announcing about the application, thank you for the information to go to my website, but they also can download that form on the Secretary of State's website at in.gov, or Eric, they can just call our office at 973-9226, and we'll get them an application in the mail the day they call.
Okay. So you all are doing obviously everything you can to try to make this as smooth a process as possible. When you're talking about social distancing people, and I know there are just things running through people's minds. You go into the store, and a number of stores have already laid out what that 6-foot distance is between things. Are you planning on doing that? Will there be marks where you need people to stand and kind of lean as they sign your poll book, or to keep people behind each other while they're out there? Or are you expecting people to kind of figure out what that 6-foot distance is on their own?
Well, I hope everyone will figure it out on their own. But yes, we will be providing assistance to those people who do not cannot estimate 6 feet from the people in front of you. Just yesterday, we did review some different decals that we will be able to purchase and put on the floor here in the courthouse. We've made our own places for 6-foot distancing by using tape. We we definitely will be taking some precautions to measure that out. And that brings up, like I said earlier, another issue. If we have to set our machines 6 foot apart, we're taking all of that into consideration in planning, to keep everyone as much distancing as we possibly can. Now, Eric, common sense tells us if we can only have, if we've got a crew of poll workers in there, and then we have 10 voters in there at a time, there's no need to put up 24 machines because we can't have a voter at every machine. So this is problematic for creating long lines, long waits, outside inclement weather if it's raining or something. So again, we're encouraging people, please vote by mail, because, this pandemic has put restrictions on us that when, we're running this election and trying to stay within all the CDC guidelines, it's problematic for how many people that we're going to be able to let be inside the vote center at one time. So just to avoid not only exposure, but to avoid those long lines and that waiting period to vote by mail is going to be quite, a plus for many people.
Okay. And they can find the application to be able to do that on your website. They can find it on the Secretary of State's website at in.gov. They can call your office, 973-9226, and you'll get an application out to them. That application has to be back to you by May 21st. Is that a noon or a midnight May 21st timeframe, just as a technical question?
That's 11:59 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, we're doing all we can. I'm not going to say it's not stressful. It's easy, because it's not. It takes a lot of planning, and our board, has had concerns at our last election board meeting that we discussed and talked about. So we are trying to get everything covered so that we can have a safe election for voters, for poll workers, for everyone involved.
You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're having some time with Wayne County Clerk Debbie Berry, who is actually on the ballot running for re-election during this time frame. I do need to be fair and mention that. And she does have a primary opponent. Before I let you go, Debbie, talk a little bit about how you see election night going. You've already mentioned that if there's a real heavy number of mail-in ballots, it might not be that night, I guess, before all the final results are taken care of. I know sometimes people have gathered here at the station to kind of watch the election and do that. I know that we are not going to be able to do that. I will be here. We are trying to figure out how to do a social distancing election night coverage, because we do have to be able to do that. So we're talking about that among the staff right now. But how do you actually see election night going? Will the mail-in ballots slow things down? What are your anticipations?
Well, depending on if there's any more changes with the legislature, because, it would be our hope, since we're getting those mail-in ballots early. I mean, we've already got some returned now, and those are stored sealed. They're not opened. We get them and match up that, yes, we sent this voter an application. Yes, their signature on the back of the envelope matches the application and their voter's registration card. So we have all those here. So it's our hope as a board that the legislature will allow us to use bipartisan teams and possibly start opening those and scanning them the week of early voting. While, the vote centers are open, maybe that would be ideal, if we just didn't leave it up to two election board members to open and scan those into the system. So that is something that, we are lobbying for, the clerks of Indiana are lobbying for, because it just makes sense that we're going to have a larger influx of mail-in ballots when all of the 92 clerks are getting on, interviews with radio stations, with local TV stations to please cast your ballot through a mail-in ballot. So, there's things that possibly, Eric, even as we're talking today, could change tomorrow of what everything we've talked about today.
Sure.
So, that is our hope, that the state will make these waivers or whatever that were restricted for legislation right now, that we can not only vote differently as voters, but to be able to process those mail-in ballots as they come in. Election day, I look for it to be a much longer night. We'll have our vote center counts in, and even though people vote electronically on the machines, Eric, our votes cast are never on the internet. So when they cast those in Hagerstown, we don't get their vote right then. We get right then that they have checked in and that voter has voted, so that they can't swing by First English Lutheran and vote again. That we just get the check-in immediately. The votes are never on the internet. Those are cast there on that machine and reserved in the judge's ballot control box. And that inspector and the opposing party judge comes back to the courthouse and brings that box. We pull that card out that they are stored on, that the votes are stored on, and then enter them into the ballot computer, and it registers and counts all the votes that are on that card. So people sometimes will, on social media, hop on there and say, my goodness, the vote center's closed at 6 o'clock, at 6:30, it's all electronic. Why don't we have the votes? Well, it's because the inspector has to come all the way from Hagerstown, and then we have to run those tapes and read that card. So it's not something that's instantaneous. So we're usually out of here by 8:30. 9, sometimes the latest, depends on, because we get all of those votes to the state so that they can be counted. And so I anticipate it'll be a late night for us. But once we get those cast ballots that were on the machines, in-person voting, and then we'll have our early voting, we'll have those numbers, but we won't have the total number until we get all of those mail-in ballots cast. And we don't know if we're going to be able to work on those the whole week before the election, or if we have to wait from election day till after, the 10 days after. So just depending on how many we receive and how many people they're going to allow us to count those and open those, because they are sealed and all have to be open individually on election day, the way the legislature is right now. So that's what it depends on. It'll be a not too much of a more late on that day, but if we get them all open and counted before that night, we might have them earlier. But the political community just has to realize it may be a day or two later this year.
Okay. Before I let you go, is there anything else that I have not asked you about, that I have not touched on, that you really want residents to be aware of as time for voting comes to us?
No, it's just, a presidential election year, so usually we have a bigger turnout. So with the COVID virus and it being a big election anyway, it's kind of like the perfect storm brewing for everyone. But no, I just want to remind people to register to vote if you have not done that, because your vote is your voice. Secondly, I encourage anyone who should not be in the public and be quarantined, we want you to vote. Just do it by mail. Just call our office, get an application, or go to one of the websites that we've given and download that application. But if you do not have internet access, please just call our office.
973-9226 is the number to the clerk's office. Again, if you don't have an internet connection and you cannot download an application, but you want to be able to vote by mail, that application has to be back to the clerk's office by May 21st.
Correct.
Okay.
And if anyone is interested in being a poll worker, please also call our office. We'll put you in touch with the people that you need to talk to in order to be put on the list for consideration to be a poll worker and get you set up for training.
Okay. Debbie, definitely appreciate the time. I thank you for spending this time and updating us on what's going on with the election season this year.
Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate everything that WCTV does to give our community all the information that they need, and really appreciative of how our community has responded and kept our numbers down and trying to flatten that curve for the COVID. So happy voting, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shine your light, we're better together. All the world we are one. We're better together. Going higher, growing higher,
For the safety of students, families, and teachers, schools across our country are closing.
School closures can have significant and lasting consequences, particularly for vulnerable students, students who may face hunger, homelessness, and even trauma.
That's where our organization, Communities in Schools, can help. For years, we've had caring adults inside schools, helping these students stay in school.
Now, we are taking our work beyond the school walls. Our caring adults are delivering meals, providing household supplies, connecting kids with online classrooms, and using technology to maintain the one-on-one relationships we know can transform the lives of students and their families.
Communities and schools, going wherever we are needed, doing whatever it takes to empower students to succeed in school and in life.
To see how you can help kids succeed, visit communitiesinschools.org.
I mean, we couldn't do what we do without First Bank and how supportive they have been throughout the years.
I've had a very good experience working with First Bank. They have been there really with all kinds of different things that I do in my life.
We consider First Bank Richmond a good friend. They're there to help us sponsor our signature events. You always are out there to help each other out.
Besides the business part of it, we just get along really well. And it's beyond a working relationship.
Welcome back to In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We are going to take a few minutes and speak with John Zetzl of Gillum and Zetzl. I do need to make the disclaimer. Gillum and Zetzl and Whitewater Community Television have had a relationship that actually predates me being executive director here at Whitewater Community Television, so it has been a long relationship. And John, thank you very much for taking some time out and maybe catching us up on some financial matters that people might be interested in.
Yes, appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
A little bit of background for you. How long have you been involved as a CPA, and kind of what got you into it real quick?
Yeah, about 30 years now, actually. I've been a CPA, and I think just had some family members that were in that occupation, and grew to see the value of helping small businesses and helping our individual clients with their family planning is really a meaningful invocation. So.
Nice. One of the biggest things that I think you might have been dealing with right now, besides the fact that they keep delaying when personal property taxes are due and state taxes are due without penalty, things of that nature, is the CARES Act that came out. That's kind of the act that allowed people to get $1,200, and I know some people have gotten theirs. I think some people may still be waiting, and also the PPP, the Payroll or Paycheck Protection Program. Talk to us a little bit. We put out that we were going to be getting some advice. Somebody asked the question that they've paid federal taxes as opposed to actually getting a refund over the last few years. They were wondering if that automatically put them in the position that they would have to wait on a paycheck from the federal government, that $1,200 check. And if so, is there anything that they could do to kind of rush that money?
Right. So let me clarify one thing that might be confusing to the listeners, and that is that this credit is really an advance credit. It's actually a 2020 credit on your return. So if somehow you did not get your full credit in this advance period, if you file the 2020 return, you could get the difference back. Now, the one thing that they've made clear is if for some reason you got more money in the advance period than you actually would get under your 2020 filing, you will not have to give that back. But nevertheless, it will all be reconciled on the 2020 income tax return. So those that
this $1,200 that people are getting is an advance on next year's return?
Correct. Yes, that's correct. Right. So the stimulus money, for example, on those that have qualifying children under the age of 17, there's going to be a $500 credit available to them, and then $1,200 for each taxpayer on on a joint return, that would be $2,400. If you have a child that, let's say, is over the age of 17 but is still your dependent, they are not going to get that. They're not going to get that credit. So you could have a situation, since these advance amounts are being based on your 2019 return, you could have a situation where my child was age 16 in 2019. I got a $500 credit in the advance period. When I go to file my 2020 return, technically, I wouldn't have gotten that $500. The IRS has said, we're not going to make you pay that back. So it's actually going to work out, I think, in their favor, no matter which way it goes. If you got too much in the advance period, you're not going to have to pay it back. On the flip side of that, if you're owed more money when you go to file your return next year, you're going to get that when you file your 2020 tax return.
Okay. One of the biggest parts of this, I think, that a lot of people have heard about is kind of the payroll or paycheck, which one is it, protection program that a lot of businesses are involved in. When it first came out, a number of the smaller businesses, particularly in some of the smaller areas, were really concerned that they didn't get it. As we're talking here on Monday the 27th, this is the start of another round of this. Talk a little bit about what some of the businesses have been going through and some of the questions that have been most asked by businesses as far as getting this money and what they can do with it.
Yeah, so depending on what banking institution they went through, there were different requirements on what information was going to be needed up front to figure out how much your maximum loan amount was going to be. For most people, copies, if you have employees, it's going to be copies of your payroll tax returns, forms 941, 940, that type of thing. For those that are self-employed or a farmer, it might be your Schedule C or your Schedule F from your 2019 income tax filing. So a lot of questions about how to compute the maximum amount that I can receive. Then secondarily, okay, how much of that am I going to have to repay? Are they going to charge me interest? And they are charging interest at the rate of 1% from the time you get the loan until the loan is either repaid or forgiven. Now, it's possible that that 1% could also be forgiven. The interest could be completely forgiven if you have enough cost to absorb all of the loan proceeds you've got. So the amount that can be forgiven is based upon the amount of payroll costs that you have in the 8-week period beginning when you receive the funding through the loan program. Up to 25% of the loan amount can also be used for rent, utilities, or mortgage interest. So the combination of those two things plus the interest on the loan, if that absorbs the entire loan amount, then it will all be completely forgiven, and that'll be a tax-free grant. So that will not be taxable income to the taxpayer.
So where people are hearing, because as you hear a news report, a 2 or 3 minute blip on this, it's almost making it sound like it's all going to be forgiven if you keep people employed, but all the money doesn't really have to go for paychecks.
Right, that is true, like I said. So up to 25% of the amount can actually be used for rent and utilities. And I think the idea of this program is that a couple of things. One, they want the businesses to remain intact so that when the economy reopens, they're ready to hit the ground running and we can get back up to speed. So if you have a storefront that you're renting, as an example, they want you to be able to continue to pay the landlord so that you're not kicked out of your establishment and you're ready to go again. And on a similar note, then for your employees, they want your employee base still intact. If you were to furlough all of your employees, perhaps they go find other opportunities elsewhere. And then when you're ready to reopen, as the economy reopens, you're looking at completely revamping your entire workforce and training and all that type of thing. So they have decided that the best thing is to try to keep those in place and ready to go. So that's the whole idea, I think, behind the PPP program is keep those employees on your payroll we'll, as the government, will pay you to do that so that everything is ready to go just as soon as we turn the switch back on.
You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're spending a few minutes with John Zetzl of Gillum and Zetzl CPAs. I've seen, and obviously Whitewater Community Television is a not-for-profit organization, so this is one that kind of caught me. I've seen it on a couple of different websites, things that say if you donate up to $300 to a not-for-profit, that money will automatically come off your next year's taxes, no itemization, no hoops to jump through. As a not-for-profit organization, I'm curious, are there certain types of nonprofits that you can donate to, and how is that being tracked?
So the tracking is going to be the same type of self-reporting that we've had forever when it comes to charitable donations. You're going to have some type of proof that you made this charitable donation. But where this is completely different than what we've experienced the last 2 years, if you'll recall, effective 1/1 of 2018, we have the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and essentially that really increased largely the amount of the standard deduction. And when that happened, much fewer returns were itemizers at that point. So for a lot of people, even though they're still making charitable donations, they really aren't getting much tax benefit because they're already taking the standard. So what this does is actually raises it up where you, even if you don't itemize, you still get a benefit. So it's a $300 deduction or $600 on a married filing joint return, and multiply that times your marginal tax rate, and that gives you some idea of what your benefit is going to be. But I would reiterate, you have to keep the same type of documentation that you would normally have to, either depending on the size of the contribution, a written receipt from the donee organization, or a canceled check.
The idea just to try to increase philanthropy during this time when maybe some things are tight for some not-for-profits, particularly some of the food banks and things?
Yes, I believe that's true. And so one thing that going along with that in the spirit of this is that they want this is only for cash donations. This is not for your clothing or whatever that's given to Goodwill. This has to be actual cash donations. Okay.
There have been 3-4 rounds of kind of federal stimulus. I know that there's always, as they roll these things out, changes, there's information that comes out after the fact. Are there 1 or 2 things that people need to know or businesses need to know between round 1 and round 4 of this that might be real important to mention?
Yeah, I think there could be. So one of the things that came out early was there was a retention credit for employers that was designed to help you keep your employees again on the payroll, and it was a 50% of wages paid after March 18th of 2020, up to a $5,000 credit per employee. Then we kind of came out with the Paycheck Protection Program, which, to be honest with you, was a much more lucrative opportunity for most of the small businesses. So I don't know that many of them would have taken the retention credit if they had taken the PPP, but they need to understand you cannot do both. It's one or the other. So if you participate in the PPP program, you can't also get the retention. But for anybody out there that could not participate in the PPP, they should look at that retention credit. There are certain businesses that do not qualify for the PPP because, as an example, passive activities. If you were a large real estate owner and you had employees and you thought you were going to apply for the PPP, but then found out you couldn't, maybe you want to consider this retention credit.
You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're spending just a few minutes trying to
understand some of the financial ramifications for individuals and businesses. We're talking with John Zetzl from Gillum and Zetzl. But John, I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us. Before I let you go, there are always things, particularly in this realm where I know nothing, that I want to try to give an expert a chance to actually let people know some information that maybe there's a question I haven't asked, I haven't broached, it wasn't sent to us. Are there one or two things that you really think are important for people to be aware of as they're going through this with the economic stimulus that's going on, whether it's business, whether it's individuals? There's a couple of tidbits maybe that you can share with us.
Yeah, sure. Maybe two things that off the cuff I can think of is, one is that for any of our listeners here that are required to take out distributions from their retirement funds, either because they're over age 70 and a half or now age 72, if they're required to take these RMDs, those have been waived for 2020. And I think the idea there is that when the stock market is so far down, they don't want people to be forced to take money out in a down market. So that would be one of them that's pretty impactful for a lot of our listeners. The other one is normally if you take money out of your retirement account and you're under age 59 and a half, there's a 10% penalty on that. So there are some opportunities now to have those 10% penalties waived or reduced or paid over a multi-year period. So that is definitely something that they want to look into. They ought to talk to their accountant about what their options are if, let's say, they had to tap in early to their retirement accounts.
I know a lot of people are trying to figure out exactly what this pandemic is going to do to them financially and otherwise. I appreciate you taking a few minutes and just trying to catch us up on a couple of things real quickly. Hopefully this will end and we won't have to, but if so, we might come back and knock on your door again and go, can you answer 2 or 3 more questions for us?
Yes, happy to do so.
John, I appreciate it. John Zetzl from Gillum and Zetzl, appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Sure, thanks, Eric.
Thanks for watching this week's In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. Thanks to Debbie Berry and John Zetzl for being my guest. If you missed any part of this show, you can see replays beginning tonight at 10:30. It will also be available on our Facebook page and also on YouTube. Join me at 2 p.m. on Fridays as I speak with Dr. David Jetmore and Dr. Thomas Huth for Ask the Doctors. That program is live here on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great weekend. I wish you well. This broadcast of In Focus is being made possible through the support of Reed Health. Reed Health, right beside you. And by First Bank Richmond, with 8 locations serving Wayne County. First Bank Richmond and you, doing great things together.